Hi everybody, Shabbat Tov and good afternoon to you all. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, hi. So I have great pleasure in introducing Sharona Fruhman to give us a share about Esther. Esther Concealed or Revealed, just to get us into the Purim spirit, even though it's somewhat different this year. We're very much looking forward to hearing Sharona. So thank you very, very much, Sharona. And go ahead. Sharona, you're on mute.
Sorry about that.
That's better.
I hate technology. Hi everyone, lovely to see you all, although I can't actually see you all because you all seem to be hiding behind your camera, except for Jacqueline, who's the only one brave enough. Hi Jacqueline. So please feel free to either reveal or keep concealed. I'd love to see your faces, but it's fine if you don't feel comfortable. So first of all, thank you, Julie, for introducing me. And thank you for arranging the share. Very kind of you. And also I want to dedicate this share for a refuah shalema for Yocheved Bas Sarah and for Peril Bas Malka, along with the rest of the Cholei Israel. So in this share, if I may, I'd like to discuss the character traits of Esther. And hopefully through the share, we're going to see how Esther's character changes and develops through the Megillah. So the name Esther means hidden. So Esther first appears with two names, Hadassah and Esther. Hadassah is a myrtle. The Talmud says Hadassah, myrtle leaves are sweet smelling and used as a metaphor to describe righteous people. Okay, so the Malbim explains that Esther was so renowned herself that she was referred to as Hadassah because of her pleasing attributes. Her good deeds and her pleasing character were reminiscent of the Hadass, the sweet smelling myrtle. Now, Esther, from the root of Hester, is hidden. So she kept her words hidden when she refused to disclose her nationality as the queen. But also it's the similar to the Persian word Estehar. Estehar means in Persian a moon or a crescent, which is a reference to Esther's beauty. So the nations would look at her and say she's beautiful like the moon. So that's Esther from Estehar in Persian. Now we see Esther's personality initially taking shape as a beautiful, righteous, modest, retiring, shy and quiet girl. That's how she's introduced to us. She grows up as an orphan in Mordechai's house, allowing him to take charge and submitting to his authority. Very submissive. She had no interest at all in assuming a position of royalty or making herself a public figure or obvious in any way. And we're introduced to Esther in Perek Base, Pasuk Zion. Now, on 3 separate occasions, Esther was forcibly abducted. She never went willingly to the king at all. The first time we hear about her being forced is when she was taken from her home. And the second time it says she was detained in Haggai's custody for 12 months. Haggai was the custodian of the king, and he was the one recruiting the girls for Esther, if you like, for Achashverosh. And the third time was when she was taken to the king's palace after the 12 months waiting period. And it says when Esther's turn arrived to come to the king, she didn't ask for anything, okay? All the other women were asking for oils and beauty treatments, and it even describes the exact oils that they were given to beautify themselves for this whole year before Achashverosh. And whatever Haggai, he was the guard of the women, whatever he said, Esther just did, and Esther found favor in everyone's eyes. It says whoever saw her found favor, even though she didn't ask for anything. Esther's approach was the opposite of the other women. obviously they wanted to beautify themselves.
Thank you very much indeed. Just put it on.
Sorry about the initial delay.
Can everybody mute, please? Can everyone mute?
Oh dear, that's what I was on.
Thank you. Sorry, Sharona.
It's okay. So Esther's approach was the opposite of the other women. They wanted to beautify themselves. They wanted to be chosen by the king, but Esther she preferred to be looked down upon so she could quickly go back to Mordechai. Now, and that's commented by a commentary called the Menot HaLevi, which is a very important commentary on the Megillah. Now, from the outset, we see modesty and the refined nature of Esther, the way she didn't want to go to the palace with all the other women. They were desperate to be chosen to be Ahasuerus's wife. She didn't want all the treatments to beautify herself when all the other women loved those luxuries. She also, importantly, never ever revealed her lineage. No matter how much she was flattered by the king, she kept it hidden. In Pasuk Yud, it says, Lo higida Esther es amar ve'es moladata, ki Mordechai tziva aleha asher lo tagid. Esther had not revealed her people or her descent because Mordechai had instructed her not to tell. So we see that Esther, although she was quiet and submissive, she was not swayed by any of the special treatment, and she refused to reveal her people or her descent as Mordechai had enjoined her. She was hoping that the king would refuse to take a woman of unknown background and that he would expel her, but of course that didn't happen. So in Perek Beis, Pasuk Tesvov, we're told about Esther's lineage for the second time. Now the Malbim says that Esther was totally different from all the other women. Not only did she already possess natural beauty and natural health, but she also brought with her strength of character and honor, as she was the daughter of Avichail. She inherited his fine character and his high intelligence. And this is what she had to offer the king. But conversely, she wanted nothing from Ahasuerus. When given the opportunity, she requested nothing. She showed unwillingness to be there. She only appeared when she was forced to. And she only took what Haggai, the king's chamberlain, he knew the tastes and what would please the king. She only did as she was ordered. And we see in Perek Beis, the king wanted so much for her to reveal her lineage that he hosted a banquet. It's called Mishteh Esther. Why was it called Mishteh Esther? Why was it called the Banquet of Esther? And why did he? It says that Ahasuerus granted the provinces a reduction in tribute and he distributed gifts. Why did he do this? So the Malbim says that having been crowned queen, Esther still refused to give her lineage. She refused to divulge her people or her descent. And Ahasuerus attempted 3 strategies to persuade her to tell. First, he hosted a great banquet for all his officials and servants, and he proclaimed that it was the Banquet of Esther. Okay, he called it the Banquet of Esther because he hoped that the honor would go to her head and she would be embarrassed to say that she wasn't going to say where she'd come from. So he thought she'd reveal her lineage because everyone would say to her, who are you? And she would be embarrassed to say, I'm not saying. But that didn't work. So then what he did was he granted the provinces a reduction in tribute, and he hoped that the province of her birth would benefit from this reduction, and Esther would then be encouraged to divulge the province of origin in order that Ahasuerus deal even more generously with its inhabitants. But that didn't work either. So finally, he distributed gifts as befits a king in the hope that Esther would want her family and her relatives to receive presents as well. And so she'd tell him who they were so that he could deliver gifts to them. But that didn't work. And we'll see later he tries another few tactics. It says that it carries on to say that Esther did not impart her descent or her people. So we already know this. We've just said it. So why does it say it again? Esther did not. It continues to say she didn't impart. Why does it repeat it? So the Malbim says that although Ahasuerus had tried to persuade her, again, he used 2 more approaches. First of all, he sent home the remaining maidens. And why did he do this? All the girls were still queuing up in the hope that maybe they'd have a chance to be Ahasuerus's wife. But to show Esther that no, he was definitely sure that he wanted her, he sent them all packing. He said, all right, bye guys, I'm choosing Esther. But this still didn't instill any confidence in Esther. And then He also promoted Mordecai, who he knew was her relative, but that still didn't help, and she still didn't impart her descent or her people. So we see here again her quality of character. Despite her rise to power, she obeyed Mordecai's instructions. She remained submissive, just as when she'd been raised at home by him. And Chazal in Maseches Megillah interpret a number of verses in the second parak of Megillas Esther as having the same focus. I think you've all got the source sheets I sent round, or if not, you can just look at them later. But basically, these verses want to demonstrate the many efforts that Ahasuerus made so that Esther should reveal her background. So we've gone through all of them. We've gone through the different strategies that he used to try and get her to reveal her lineage. But at the same time, we see the steadfastness of Esther, who did not reveal her background. Again, it says, Lo hegida Esther es amo ve'es moladata ki Mordechai tziva alha asher lo sagid. Esther did not tell her people or her birthplace because Mordechai commanded her not to tell. So we see that Ahasuerus attributed unique importance to discovering these biographical facts about Esther. And then he did much to persuade her to reveal these hidden facts. And this demonstrates in a way the degree to which Ahasuerus loved Esther. He loved Esther. He neither deposed of her because of her failure to reveal this information, or did he treat her as a rebel and punish her, like he probably would have done with the other women. So with the help of Rashi, we can now see and understand the praise that Chazal give Esther for her resoluteness. Now, the words Mishte Esther, when he made a banquet for her, why it says Mishte Esther, and these words are superfluous, but it didn't have to say Mishte Esther. But again, he wanted to flatter Esther, as we've said, causing her to demonstrate goodwill towards Ahasuerus. As we said, it didn't work. And then we read, V'hanacha lamdinoso, Ahasuerus granted a reduction in tax, also in her honor. He thought such a gesture that aggrandized her in the eyes of all the country, not just his officers and servants, would be appreciated sufficiently to break her silence. And again, this was unsuccessful. It says, Vayitei Madrid Kiyat HaMelech. He gave her expensive gifts to all the dignitaries, to her family, to everyone. And these gestures did not succeed. Now, the Mefarshim point out on this that the credit assigned to Esther for keeping her secret is actually in the second pasuk, not the first. The first time we're told that Esther kept her secret, it says, Kasher Siva Mordechai, because as Mordechai commanded her to do so. Now, we know how much Esther respected Mordechai. After all, he had brought her up in his house. He's raised her when her parents both died. So some people say, some of Mefarshim say he even married her. So either way, she was a very close relative, or her husband. So either way, we know he cared a lot about her. So and in fact, it says he came to the gates every day just to inquire about her well-being. He cared so much about her. So they had this kind of relationship, whether they were married or not. It's a difference of opinions, but either way, they cared a lot about each other, and he came to ask her every day how she was doing. And therefore, of course, she wasn't going to not listen to him. She trusted him 100%. But what's really striking is, as I said in the second pasuk, now that Mordechai tacitly allowed her to reveal her ancestry, according to the Gemara, it tells us that Mordechai himself was actually advising Ahasuerus on how to get Esther to reveal her lineage. He was happy for her now to reveal her lineage because he realized that she wouldn't get in trouble, so to speak, from Ahasuerus, and he was happy. But she still, it was her personal modesty that caused her to refrain from divulging her royal family. And this is noted in the Ion Yaakov. And that's why the next pasuk says, there was a second gathering of maidens, and the following verse says, Ein Esther Magedes Maladata, and Esther still refused to reveal her birthplace. So I think we've clearly explained how Esther was submissive. She listened to everything Mordechai said, and she also had about her this kind of strength of character that was so strong, and she just refused to reveal her birthplace, her people. She just wanted to, for her own modest reasons and for the sake of her people, she wanted to keep it quiet. So we see in Masechet Megillah 13b, we note a common thread associated with Rachel, with Shaul, and with Esther. So Rachel Imenu, Shaul HaMelech, and Esther. According to the Gemara, Esther was descended from Shaul, okay, through her son Binyamin. So Rashi says that the Targum on Esther actually reckons out 10 generations from Shaul to Esther, and then 10 generations from Rachel to Shaul. Now, Rachel Amenu and also Shaul HaMelech both concealed information to protect others. When did this happen? We see that Rachel did not disclose that she had told Leah the secret codes when it came to Leah marrying Yaakov. Rachel kept it quiet. And Shaul HaMelech, we see, did not disclose that he'd been informed by Shmuel that he was to be anointed king. He kept it quiet. So we can see that Esther inherited this trait of keeping things concealed. And Chazal see Esther as a continuation of of a tradition that began many, many centuries and generations before her. It says, "B'schar snias shehoisa b'Rachel, zochsa v'yotza mimenu Shaul, v'schar snias shehoisa b'Shaul, zocha v'yotza mimenu Esther." So what does that mean? That means that the reward for the special snias, the modesty that was demonstrated by Rachel Imenu, it was that she had Shaul HaMelech as her descendant. And the reward for the special sneers, the modesty that was demonstrated by King Shaul, he, as a reward, had Esther as his descendant. So Rachel, we're told, concealed the fact, as I said, she revealed the secret code which Yaakov Avinu devised so that Leah would not suffer embarrassment. Now, we read in Sefer of Micha, it says, "Higid lecha adam ma tov, Uma Hashem doresh mimcha ki im asos mishpat va'avas chesed v'hatzneya leches im elokecha." So what does that mean? Hashem has told man what is good and what Hashem demands from you: only do justice and to love kindness and modest walking with Hashem. Now, the Metzudas explains that the word hatzneya is miloshen snias, bahaster. It comes from the expression of being modest and hidden. So we can see here that Rachel demonstrated ultimate v'hatzneya leches im elokecha. She totally submitted to Hashem's will because she was totally aware that he's able to do what he wishes. So when you totally submit to someone, you completely trust them and you know that they basically have the ultimate power. And this is hatzneya leches. Rachel kept herself hidden. She completely submitted her will to Hashem. And so in this way, we see that Rachel was the most fitting forebear to Shaul. He was made king over Israel. And at this beginning moment of a tremendous power and authority that was granted to him, he refrained from discussing it because it was against Hashem's will. Hashem had told him, don't tell anyone that you're going to be anointed king. Now, he could have, felt flattered and told everyone, I'm going to be king. And it would have raised his honor and his glory and so on. But Hashem told him not to, and he trusted Hashem completely. And he too was immensely aware that he was in Hashem's presence. He too fulfilled Hatzneya Leches. And the matter of the kingship, he did not tell. That's in Sefer Shmuel. So we can see that the refusal of Esther Hamalka to tell was also the same genre of exemplary behavior demonstrated by Shaul and by Rachel before him. Esther was the queen with evidently unique sway over the king. She refused to tell him her secrets, and eventually he gave up his search. Her very name, of course, implies that hiddenness and modesty were her motto. Esther. The Mefarshim point out that modesty was part of her behavior all the time. She didn't seek any special treatment or spotlight, although all was hers for the taking. She could have had anything she wanted, but she demanded nothing. She kept herself to herself. It says, Yefas Toar V'Tovas Mareh. What does that mean? It means she was a beautiful form and a fair appearance. Esther is Mordechai's cousin. As we see, she comes from the tribe of Binyamin, the son of Rachel. So she shares, again, some traits with Rachel and her various descendants. For one, she's beautiful of form and appearance, which was also a description of Rachel, and we see that in Bereshith. Esther's actually considered one of the 4 beauties of the world, 4 beauties according to the Talmud in Megillah. So she's one of the most beautiful women in the world, and yet she demanded nothing, no treatments, nothing, just natural beauty. And Esther's silence or ability to hide a secret, as we see, it runs in her family. Rachel excelled in the art of silence, and so did all her descendants hide information. Binyamin also, we see, he knew about the sale of Yosef, and he didn't tell. With Shaul, he didn't tell, and with Esther, she didn't tell about her birthplace. So we see that the silence or the ability to keep a secret is a root trait of Esther, inherited from her ancestor. And this seems to be a skill or an art, which is not just a result of extreme compassion, like in the case of Rachel, but rather also an expression of humility, of modesty, and putting oneself aside for a greater cause. When one refuses to reveal private information, it seems that they're letting a higher authority take control of events and not to take an active role in changing the course of history. Tznius is also mentioned as a family trait of Esther's, and it says in the reward of Rachel Tznius, she merited that Shaul descend from her, and in the merit of Shaul Tznius, he merited that Esther descend from him. So this Tznius thing was all along the ancestral line. Now, the events of Purim was a time of seemingly abject Hespeponim, when Hashem's presence was seemingly not visible whatsoever. Of course, we know that Hashem is always present, but it seemed almost as though he was out of the picture. So maybe that's why we can say here that we see Hashem's reward of midah keneged midah, measure for measure. Perhaps Hashem saw Esther's loyalty despite his hiddenness and said, my children are so loyal to me, so much do they make themselves modest before me, though I, Hashem, am hidden from them. Do they not deserve that I, Hashem, shall reveal myself from my place of Hester? Is that not the divine justice which they deserve? Rachel Imenu, Shaul HaMelech, and Esther HaMalka all made personal sacrifice that caused Hashem to reveal himself in spite of the darkness that he imposed. So because they were so steadfast in their ability to keep a secret, Hashem said, you know what, they're keeping themselves so hidden, so midah keneged midah, I'm going to show myself to them, I'm not going to hide. And we see at the end of Megillah and the end of Esther, it says, Lahudim hoisa ora. So we see the Jews had the light that Esther brought out from its hiding. And this is a very powerful concept. But now we're going to see how Esther changes and her character kind of develops when she has a need to, okay? Because when we don't need to do anything, and then we should keep quiet. When we don't need to be out there and outgoing and outspoken, then it's good to be tznius and modest. However, when we have to do something, we've got to save lives, then we've got to come out there and we've got to be brave and courageous. And Esther realized that she had a responsibility. She had the courage of her conviction. She realized that, as Mordechai pointed out, maybe this was the reason why she was chosen to be queen. Now, what happened was that we're going to see the path to assertiveness that Esther made. So as we've said, she started off very, very submissive to Mordechai. She didn't demand anything. She remained hidden. Her name means hidden. She was very sweet and pleasant like a myrtle. And now we're going to see how she became more assertive. So what happened was she remained hidden in Mordechai's house for 3 years until she was finally found and she was forced out by the king's officers. And as we've said, even then she didn't request anything to make herself more desirable. Now, when Esther hears of Mordechai's strange behavior of tearing his clothes and wailing bitterly in the streets of Shushan, she sees it completely uncharacteristic of him and of their tribe. It says the queen was very shaken. She couldn't understand it. Mordechai's also from their tribe, Binyamin. They kept things quiet. They kept things hidden. What's going on? So she sends him clothes to wear and she tells him to remove his sackcloth. She's not used to public displays of emotion. And Binyamin, as we said previously, is the tribe who excels in keeping things silent and hidden. So what was Mordechai doing, going around ripping his clothes and screaming in public inappropriately? It's very inappropriate. So Esther was shaken up, and Mordechai somehow clarified to Esther through Hasoch, who was the messenger, a guy called Hasoch, that even though modesty and silence are normally important character traits, there's a time and a place where one has to speak up and take assertive action. And Mordechai says to her, because if you're silent now, relief and salvation will come to the Jewish people from another place, and you and your father's house will be lost. So what he's saying is the Jews are going to be saved anyway. Relief will come from somewhere else. They're meant to be saved, but you will be the loser in this. Esther didn't take long to grasp the message. She was very, very wise, and her personality takes a turn. She springs into action. She becomes the initiator, the active leader, the decision maker, the commander. No longer does she blindly execute Mordechai's orders. Rather, she orders him herself. Go and gather all the Jews and fast for me for 3 days and 3 nights. And I and my maidens will do the same. And I will go to the king, not according to the law. And if I perish, so I perish. In Perek Dalet, Posuk Tes Zion, it says, V'ka'asher avadati avadati, if I perish, so I perish. So Esther said with utter selflessness, she told Mordechai, if I perish, in other words, for transgressing the king's command and going without permission, so I perish. And she uses the word I. In other words, I will perish, not the Jewish people. The Jewish people will survive no matter what. But I will perish because I'm the one that's transgressing the law of the king. Everyone knew you were not allowed to go and see the king unless he called for you. So since Mordechai had now assured Esther that the Jewish people would be saved and that this would not be dependent on her, the pasuk says, once Esther was reassured that she was not risking the Jews' lives, only her own, she was prepared to go to the king. So again, this displays utter selflessness. She was prepared to risk her own life, but not the Jewish people. And from here on, Esther takes upon herself the mantle of prophecy and acts with the decisiveness and courage befitting of a real queen. By choosing to accept Mordechai's challenge of going to the king unannounced, Esther was putting her life at risk for the sake of the Jewish people. According to the opinion in the Talmud, that Esther was actually married to Mordechai, since Esther now plans to willingly choose to approach Achashverosh, she obviously fears that this will automatically change her relationship to Achashverosh and will consequently forbid her as an adulterous woman, now that she's been with Achashverosh, from ever returning to her husband Mordechai. But Esther reasons to herself, look, if the Jewish nation are at risk of annihilation, then what other considerations can apply? We're anyway going to all be destroyed, or at least I'll be destroyed anyway. So what marriage am I trying to save? Esther risked her life by going to see Achashverosh. She risked appearing brazen and feisty when she invited Haman and Achashverosh to a party. She risked Achashverosh being jealous that she wanted Haman there, and she risked her life by accusing Haman, who was Achashverosh's most trusting minister. She sees herself now as a catalyst for the redemption. Esther's no longer a girl from a specific family with her own individual set of circumstances. She's taking responsibility for the nation. And it says in the text that Mordechai did everything Esther commanded him to do. So even Mordechai realized that he now has to actually submit to Esther's will. He realized who's the boss now. She was so we see that change of character. When she realized she needed to be the boss, she needed to be the initiator, she stood up and took action. And we see that she was also very, very wise and perceptive. The Kli Yakar and other Mefarshim also explain that the Jews were lacking in Bein Adam L'Chavero and Achdus. We see this from Haman's phrase. He says, Mefuzar or Mefurad. And what does that mean? It means scattered and dispersed. So the general text means that the Jews are scattered and dispersed amongst the nations. In other words, they're few and far between. But the Kli Yakar says that Mefuzar and Mefurad can be interpreted not as scattered and dispersed amongst the nations, but scattered and dispersed amongst themselves. They lacked unity. The Jews lacked unity, and Haman was pointing out to Ahasuerus that on a spiritual level, the Jews are susceptible to attack when they lack achdus. So they went partying with the Persians. They were quite assimilated by this point, and Haman wanted to hone in on this. So when Esther begins her attempt to save the Jews, what she does is she directs Mordecai to go and assemble the Jews. Now, the Monos Halevi, as we mentioned this commentary before, it's an important commentary on the Megillah written by Rav Shlomo Alkabetz. He explains that Esther was trying to do was she was trying to counteract Haman's claim that they were scattered and dispersed. She wanted the Jews to specifically express achdus through gathering together to fast. Throughout Jewish history, we've seen that the secret to survival is our unity. When we remain unified, then we survive. Based on the theme of achdus as well, the Monos Halevi interprets the mitzvah of Mishloach Monos. In their wisdom, Mordecai and Esther instituted this mitzvah to emphasize the achdus of friendship, to give shlach monos, to give to our friends, to negate Haman's claim. Finally, what she did, and this again shows her utter strength of character, Esther appealed to the Chachamim, to the sages, to include her in Tanakh, despite them refusing initially. The pasuk says, "Vatichtov Esther Hamalka bas Avichail u'Mordechai Yehudi es kol tokev," and Esther the queen and Mordecai wrote with all power. What does this mean? It means Esther wanted the Megillah to be included as one of the Kesuvim, one of the Kisvei HaKodesh. Chazal didn't want to include it originally because it's forbidden to add to the Kisvei HaKodesh, the holy writings. You're not allowed to add. And therefore, Esther and Mordecai, with all the power of their royalty, sent letters containing words of peace and truth. It says, Divrei Shalom va'emes, persuading them to come to an agreement. Eventually, Chazal agreed to Esther's request, and it says, Vanichsav ba'sefer, it was written in the book. But in Maseches Megillah, we see the request of Esther. It outlines that she wanted the history of her reign to be recorded in Tanakh. She wanted to be one of the Kisvei HaKodesh. And they said that Esther said, and we see the whole dialogue, I've printed it out in the source sheet, so you can have a look at it later. But she says, write me for future generations and canonize my book as part of the Bible. They refused initially because the reason why they refused is not because they didn't like Esther, not, because she was a woman or anything like that. But it was because, firstly, Hashem's name's not mentioned in Megillas Esther. So they were concerned about that. Secondly, it doesn't put the Jews in a great light. We see them assimilating and partying with the Persians. And thirdly, because they didn't want to draw attention to the fact that yet again, the Jews came out on top. They were worried about provoking jealousy with the other nations. The pasuk in the Torah around which the argument revolved, and we see this, it's in Shemos. It says, Hashem told Moshe, Kasov zos zikaron b'sefer, write this for a memorial in the book. Now, Chazal took this to mean that there was to be a maximum limit of 3 mentions to be placed on the theme of war against Amalek throughout Tanakh. So what are the 3 places? Zos, Zikaron, and Basefer. Now, Zos refers to the one in Sefer Shemos, which records the battle against Amalek waged by Yehoshua. Then we move on to Zikaron, which refers to the exhortation to later generations to remember it for all time, which appears at the end of Parshat Kiseitze in Sefer Devarim. And finally, Basefer. This refers to the war waged by King Shaul against Amalek, recorded in Sefer Shmuel. But when we further reflect on this, we can see that Chazal felt able to reinterpret the pasuk. And how did they do this? They wanted to allow 4 mentions in total. They were able to allow it by the following formula. So we're going to look at the revised version now. What they decided was, in fact, that Zos covered both the mentions in Shemos and Devarim. So what they did was they conglomerated Shemos and Devarim, and they decided that the entire Torah can be counted as a single book. So that So they conglomerated those into one, and this then left room for Zikaron to refer to Sefer Shmuel, and then that left space for the third and the final mention, and that was Basefer, to be Megillat Esther. Esther, what she did with her strong influence, she managed to persuade them that all the reasons for initially refusing her entry into the Kisvei HaKodesh were not as important as teaching the future Jewish nation, that firstly, when everything seemed really tough, like for her, she was abducted, taken away from Mordechai against her wishes. She had to deal with Haman plotting to kill her people. And not only that, but she lived in constant fear of being found out to be Jewish and to be killed herself. Nevertheless, to realize that there's always hope, always a light at the end of the tunnel. Also, unlike with Kriyat Yamsuf, for example, the book of Esther has no supernatural miracles. Everything was seemingly very natural. It's obviously much easier for people to relate to. It could have happened to any of us. That's why Esther fought for her story to be recorded in the canon of Tanakh, not for the sake of her own honor, as we've said before, not for her own glory, but she felt it necessary to inspire future generations and to strengthen their emunah and hope that even when times are tough, there's always that glimmer of light. And it's through the tough times that one becomes stronger. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So much so that Esther was able to save the whole Jewish nation. Was it because Esther was brazen? Was she looking for glorification or honor? No. As we've said, she usually hid away from the limelight, as we've learned already. But Esther felt so passionately that the Jewish people should learn from her story, that they should be encouraged to have faith in Hashem. And that's why she persisted relentlessly. And eventually she succeeded in persuading the Chachamim. In fact, Chazal's explanation of the name Esther reflects this very same concept. Esther min haTorah minayin. What's the source for Esther in the Torah for Esther? It says, "Va'anochi haster astir panai bayom hahu." I will surely hide my face from you on that day, from Devarim. And the Gemara in Chulin also explains that Esther is alluded to in the Torah. And he says, I will really hide my face from them. The Talmud assumes that the Torah is obviously hinting towards Esther in the Purim story. Even though her appearance on the stage of Jewish history did not occur until many, many centuries later, yet Esther is so significant. She's such a significant character, and she's had so much to contribute to our national heritage that she must be represented somewhere in the Torah. The allusion to Esther in the Torah is a description of hiddenness and despair as a consequence of the Jewish people distancing themselves from Hashem. Hashem hides his face from them to the point where he's no longer felt in their lives. And as we've said, of course, Hashem never actually leaves the Jewish people, but seemingly random and meaningless events make it appear as if he's no longer there. And as we know, there's no mention of Hashem's name in the Megillah at all. So Chazal derive from this that the Purim story is of biblical authority. So even during periods of exile, when we don't feel the presence of Hashem around us, he nonetheless watches over us and intervenes in our fate decisively when we're under attack. Although Hashem's name did not appear in the Megillah, we see that Haman did not succeed in killing a single Jew. We just read Parshas Zachor on Shabbos, where it records a divine command to us to recall permanently what Amalek did to us when we came out of Egypt, that they attacked us whilst we're traveling peacefully through the desert, deliberately targeting our weakest among us. Haman's called Agagi in the Megillat Esther, which means he was descended from Agag, who was the king of Amalek at the time of Shmuel and Shaul. And of course, we know that Mordechai was descended from Shaul. So again, we see connections. Rabbi Twersky, Zecher Sadik Livracha, quotes Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev in Kedushas HaLevi, saying, the miracle of Purim indeed surpasses the miracles commemorated by the festivals. The 10 plagues, Kriyat Yamsuf, the Mon, the revelation at Har Sinai were all manifestly supernatural phenomena, amazing miracles, but supernatural, easily recognized by Hashem's interventions. So with these unbelievable miracles, there's no challenge to our emunah. Obviously, if we see these kind of miracles, we're going to believe in Hashem. But the problem with that was that after the miracles ceased, the Jews backslid into idolatry. Miracles are impressive, but then the effect may not endure. And this is why the miracle of Purim is more important than the miracles commemorated by the festivals. As Rabbi Twersky explains, there was nothing at all supernatural about Purim, yet everything is being orchestrated by Hashem to bring about the salvation of the Jews. Every little event in the story of Purim was Hashem at work, but we just couldn't see it. It just wasn't apparent. But in hindsight, when we look back, we see that obviously Hashem was around. Obviously, it's impossible to not notice him. But as if we read it chronologically, we see that everything was natural. The Purim story conveys the basis of our faith. As Rambam states, I believe that Hashem alone made, makes, and will make everything. That every single thing that happens in the world is under direct management of Hashem. And that is why Purim is of greater significance than Pesach, Shavuos, and of Sukkot. The miracle of the Megillah is that all of these individual events fit together to save Am Yisrael for destruction. And this is called a Nes Nistar, hidden miracles. The Mefarshim explained that the reason why the Megillah does not mention Hashem's name is specifically to teach us this idea that even when we do not see Hashem in an overt way, Hashem is always still running the show. Esther therefore asked Hashem to write this down, to record the events in the Megillah. Hashem's hidden but unique supervision had to be set down in print for generations to come, so that the nation would have an understanding of how to relate to Hashem in times of complete darkness and despair, even when there were no overt miracles. What happens when everything looks bleak and you can't find Hashem anywhere, when you don't know if he's approving of your actions or not, or even if feel the tiniest spark of holiness or spirituality? That is the time when you must place your trust in Hashem and go forward, relying on your inner voice of clarity and reason, knowing that Hashem never, ever leaves his nation. It's then that you must do everything possible to re-establish the lines of communication between Hashem and the Jewish people through Achdus, and so on. So eventually, that's why Chazal agreed with Esther's assessment. She managed to persuade them, and they established a holiday in her merit and a Megillah in her name, which will exist for eternity, as it says in the Megillah. And the days of Purim will not pass from amongst the Jews, and their memory will never cease from their descendants. Esther sacrificed everything for the bigger cause, the opportunity to live among the people she loved, and even her own spiritual fulfillment in the world, and as far as she was concerned, in the next world as well, for the cause of good and for the nation of Israel. So we see Esther taught herself and the Jewish people skills, assertiveness training, if you like, which they could use throughout the years of exile and hiddenness. Place your trust in Hashem to know with conviction and clarity that Hashem is listening, even when he's deeply, deeply hidden. Unite, have Achdus as a people, and act to arouse his mercy. And even, if necessary, risk your life, knowing that Hashem will respond to save the people. This sensitivity, which Esther developed within herself, and the level to which she elevated the Jewish people will remain with us throughout the generations and will enrich us even in the Messianic era. In that great era of light and clarity, all the other holidays will no longer be necessary, but Purim and Esther's message will illuminate for eternity. So I hope that explains the development of Esther's character and the important lessons that Esther has come to teach us. Purim Sameach, everyone. And if anyone has any comments, I'm here, or questions.